Hello and welcome to another edition of DSLBD's District Capitalized Money Monday series. Today, January 31st, we're going to be speaking about navigating DC business grant requirements with the City First Enterprises, CFE, and Department of Small Local Business Development. Next two slides, please. A little bit about DSLBD and the Inno.ED team. We are the DC government's agency that supports the development, economic growth, and retention of district-based businesses, as well as promotes economic development throughout the district's commercial corridors. I'm from Camille Nixon. I'm from the Innovation Equitable Development team, Inno.ED, and we're here to help your business at all stages of your development, from the idea you have all the way out to contracts. We have a lot of different resources to help you through our DC Business Toolkit, trainings like this, available on DSLBD Eventbrite. And we are available to meet with you by phone or online, myself, as well as the rest of the Inno.ED team. Next slide. One of Inno.ED's program is District Capitalized. That's how we have our Money Monday series, some guidance that we provide on a weekly basis around financing and financial management. We also have products like grants, loans, and support other providers, grants and loans, and also support for the whole ecosystem so that you have access to financing and financial management assistance from DSLBD and our partners. If you haven't already, be sure to sign up for DC Business Funding Alert to get information about upcoming financing and financial management resources. Next slide. Again, Camille Nixon. I'm a project manager and capital access manager for DSLBD. I wanted to bring in my program manager, Kate, to introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. This is Kate Marin, the Program Manager for the Innovation and Equitable Development Division. I'm so glad to have Viviana and Camille here today to talk through these topics. I'll be back on in a few minutes, just talking through a couple of slides, but you're in good hands with this group.
Thanks, Kate. And also Viviana, next slide, please, who you heard earlier on the phone. She is from City First Enterprises. Viviana, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm the Small Business and Grant Program Manager. I'm be working with City First Enterprises first as a consultant. There's a worker for almost 2 years. So I really got into the start of the pandemic with all these grants. And previously I was working several years for another CDFI, local CDFI. So I'm really well aware of the business environment that we had, and previously, in other countries, another capacity I was working with, business owners, minority owners, indigenous, organizations, for-profit and non-profit.
Thanks, Viviana. And just to underscore, Viviana and much of the City First Enterprises team has a deep knowledge of grants, and specifically DC government grants. So the information they're going to share today is all the things they've seen over the years, the good, the bad, the things that you should improve on, so you have a really successful grant application. Next slide, please. If you haven't already, take advantage of the chat to introduce yourself, use your business's name, how people can connect with you, maybe even mention what grants you're exploring. We often have businesses who make virtual connections through our chats on partnering on future grant opportunities, so take advantage of that if you'd like. Next slide. So for today's topics, we have a lot to cover, but I think we can do it in the hour that we have left. We'll be navigating DC business grants. We'll kick off with considerations prior to applying that Kate will walk us through, and then Viviana will talk about how to prepare your documents, common document mistakes and how to solve them, and very critical, the numbers that you'll need to submit with your grant application. Kate will join us again to talk about some common submission challenges, and I'll wrap us up going through where you can get help generally and where to find grants. We'll end giving you information about next week's companion session, navigating the Bridge Grant Fund that CFE is helping administer, as well as some upcoming grants and resources that will help you, and then we'll end the question and answers. Let's get started. Kate, would you like to kick us off?
Yes. So one of the things that we're going to talk about is a little bit about what to take into account prior to applying. And it looks like I'm going to talk from some other slides that I did earlier today, so I'm not sure if the most updated slides are in here, Camille. But as we look at what to think about before applying to a grant, a lot of it is about making sure that you have the time and the resources so that you can do a good job in the application, because you're going to put a lot of time and effort into this. And so when you put a lot of time and effort into it, you definitely want to make sure that you put everything together so that you can potentially achieve that grant, because time is money in business. As I pull those pieces up, one of the first things that you're going to be looking for, and Camille will talk about this more later, is what grants to apply to. And it can be confusing because there have been a lot of grants that have been out. Some of these grants are one-time only. Some of these grants come back again every year. Some of them are from district government. Some of them are from the federal government. Some of them are from private places. We're talking a lot about district government grants today. So one of the websites that I suggest you keep an eye on, it's new this year, is called obviouslydc.com. And I'm going to put that into the chat, obviouslydc.com. And that has a link in it that has funding opportunities. And those funding opportunities include grants, but they include other types of funding opportunities as well. And so it's a great place to be looking as you're trying to think about how to get funded for your business. Within that, the very first thing that you want to be looking at is timelines. You want to make sure that you know what the deadline for a grant to apply is, and that you've backdated everything that you're going to need to assess, and then if you are going to do it, to actually apply to the grant. Within that, it can be hard to know how much time you need, but we see a lot of people, application after application, who don't quite finish those applications because other stuff comes up or they hear about it too late. And so as you first assess that timeline and put that deadline on your calendar, I highly recommend that you actually put the deadline that you're going to finish a couple days ahead of time, because people also find often they'll prepare everything offline, they'll go to put everything into whatever application system there is, and then they'll be missing something or there'll be some sort of error, and they need time to be able to correct that. And that could be just a challenge with the application system, or it could be that you missed something as you were preparing and putting things through. So the place that you want to be looking for all of this information is something called the request for applications. The request for applications is a very common document that most government grants have, and that is an official legal document. So it's often referred to as the RFA, but you want to find the RFA and make sure you have the most recent copy of the RFA. Every agency that makes grants has a slightly different looking RFA, but it's going to follow the same general pieces of giving you an objective. It's going to tell you what are the restrictions on the grant. So why are they making this grant? What can that grant be spent on? Who can it be spent with? And so one of the things you really want to look into closely is eligibility. It's all going to be there in that RFA document, but the eligibility can sometimes be confusing. And so if you're on the fence and you're not sure if you're eligible, that is a great time to be reaching out to the grant maker at whatever information they've said to ask questions. If you think it's a maybe, please definitely check. And one of the hardest pieces, I think, on grant eligibility, other than just meeting the required documentation, is on business type. And so business types, this would be, are you a florist? Are you a barbershop? Are you this? Are you that? There's a lot of different terminology that we can use to describe a business. And so many times what you'll find is that the grant maker is doing the best job that they can to describe those eligible type businesses. But if it's really unclear, or if it's a big list and you don't know if you fit in, that's a great thing to be asking questions on. So once you've gotten the RFA and you've looked at that final timeline, and you've thought about your eligibility and you think that you either are or might be eligible, at that point, you want to start thinking about, are you going to need additional support to complete this application? That may include talking to your accountant. And so that way you've scheduled out, if you need to get in touch with someone early on in the process, you're able to schedule that in. Because the other thing can happen with a lot of grants is you're going to get all your stuff on time, but if you're relying on someone who's not part of your company to complete something, then they need enough time to complete that so you can get there by the deadline. So once you've read the instructions carefully, I'm going to highly suggest that you make a checklist of everything that's going to need to get done, that you finalize a list of questions, and then you go to the information sessions. You see if those questions get answered in the information session, and if not, you make sure to ask it in the information session or ask it in follow-up. So any question you have, make sure you actually ask it. Don't guess, because there's a reason that support is in place. Another thing to do early on is to create a login account for whatever application system exists, make sure you remember that login information. A lot of times people will create a login account, they'll forget that they've done it, or they'll lose their password, to make sure that you have all of that. And then you'll notice it mentions on here FAQs. There are always questions that come up in any grant process. And so agencies typically look to clarify those questions that are commonly asked as they continue to come up. And that's only coming up because people are asking. So you can also review those FAQs to see if it's answering any of those questions. And since they're updated often, checking back, and particularly checking back before you submit final. And then the last piece is, considering if there are other free technical assistance available. There are many different technical assistance providers throughout the district who offer free services. They may or may not be a full expert on everything in the grant, but you want to understand how well do they know this grant? Can you work with them, and how can they support you? And so often there is some of that information that is listed within the grant application. If it's not listed within the grant application or RFA, you can also reach out to any of the government groups that do small business development support, and we'll be able to talk about some of the TA service providers that exist in the district. So, see, these slides were a little bit different. So we talked through all of these, so I'm just going to show them to you in the slides. And I believe this slide deck will be available afterwards. Sorry about that, Camille. I didn't realize that my slides had gotten moved into 3 slides. So I just told you all of this without being able to see it on the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over as people start talking a little bit about how to prepare those important documents that are absolutely required when you're applying for a government grant.
Hi, it's me again, Viviana. So let's talk about what documents usually we have to review in an applications. This list is based in, the many other grants that we administer, but as well of the other grants that we usually, are open to the district. Being like, for example, Great Streets grants, other arts like grants. And in general, this is the minimum documentation that you will need to be to pass a verification, that the district usually wants. And this is based in like the definitions that they have under the codes, under the laws it passes for use the funds. So we will need to have at least this minimum like 8 documents, and I put insurance there at the end, because they are needed for us to verify that the business exists, that the business is in compliance with the district, the business is operating in compliance to the rules and regulations of the district. And if you remember when you open your business, maybe someone guide you through all the steps and like what you need to do first in order to register, in order to obtain your business license, in order to operate. So it's generally go back to those basic, but that basic information, those basic steps. There's a lot of information about like the proper way to create your entity, like in many different guides that the district has, many resources that are available for you and your business. You name it. There is a lot of information on DC about these specific documents. It's a little bit confusing sometimes to find the exact web page or the exact information that we're looking when we are preparing for grants. So this is something that every business owner needs to have in a folder in their computer. If they don't feel so comfortable with having everything computer in a folder in their desk, but they need to be available for every single business owner at all times. And, these documents, they are going to request you for apply for, grants, for request capital, to get certifications, to, purchase or to acquire property. These are like basic documents that you need to have. So let's start from there. I have here on the corner, you will say, read us, be clear and honest. I think this is the most important 3 things that I want you to take from this presentation is that if it is information about the grant, read it. And if you actually get selected, read all the agreement, because you are signing that you agree with all the terms, the obligations, and the penalties. And that's the important key there, obligations and penalties. And that includes reporting, that includes providing an insurance, that includes continuing compliance. So make sure that when you are applying for the grant, if you get the status of a grantee, you need to read first prior to accepting a grant. So this is like going to the job market. You will need certain documents. You will need to apply, right? You need to submit your application. And then if you get a job, you will get an offer. So you need to read and verify what you are getting into. So also ask, as everyone says, there are emails for each grant where you can contact them and ask them about specific questions, go the sessions, and try to make the questions that you are unsure, and be clear and honest about your situation. So when someone is answering your questions or reviewing your documents, is aware of or has a way to explain maybe why this is happening. So let's go to the documents. So the first document that you need is an EIN letter. So EIN letter is the document that you need to request through a form called SS4. Let's not be so technical, but it's the form that it provides you an EIN number. So one of the major issues with the EIN letter is that, it reflects your legal business name and your taxpayer information for that entity, right? That can be yourself can be an entity, and then can apply for EIN, right? Or any other, you name it, LLC, INC. So there is a document from the IRS that tells you exactly what's your name and what is your tax number. So that means that you actually, when you have an EIN number, an EIN letter, means that you actually register, let's call it in the district. You register first in the district and you created your articles of incorporation, right? You can be a foreigner, you can be a domestic entity that registered to do business in the city. Once you register with that name, exactly that name and not other name, you register with an EIN. You register with the IRS to obtain the EIN, right? Now, remember, once you register with the EIN, what you do? You go and apply for your registration with OTR. So OTR is taxes in this state. So once you register with OTR, you will get linked that EIN and that legal name to your documents. So what we're talking here is that all legal names, the same structure, it needs to be they needs to be the same. So let's suppose A&B, INC, A&B LLC in the EIN document needs to be the same as A&B, INC, A&B LLC under your articles of incorporation. And needs to be the same name in your clean hands. So that's what usually we look for it. If you think that those names don't match, then maybe there is something to do about it. The other thing is that those two documents, it provides information about who you are, how you are formed, are you registered with IRS, and are you registered with the OTR, and are you in compliance paying your taxes with OTR? So those two documents give us all that information. The number 3 business license, it gives us information if you actually can operate as a business at a time. So registration only says when you created your entity. It doesn't give us any information about when you started to generate revenue and when you open your store, when you open to operations, just when you register something. So business license also provides us information about, are you registered at home? Are you working from home? Are you working from an office space or a commercial space? When you started to operate under that service, what type of services you can provide. Is those names, legal name, trade name match? How many business licenses are under that specific address? Every single thing that you see in the document actually give us a lot of information to figure out how is formed your business. So it is important you have all those documents. Certificate of occupancy, it tells you in what place you operate and for what uses is allowed. As well, it provides us, extra information that usually grants don't review, but that's mainly the reason why it's requested. A lease agreement is really important, or if you already own your own, if you already own the building where you are operating, or the commercial space where you are operating, like it matches, that information needs to be under the business name and under the certificate of occupancy. So at least it helps us to verify that you actually have a business, you are operating there, and until when you are going to continue to operate in that particular space. So at least someone can have a business license and can stop operations in that particular location, but it doesn't tell, like itself, the business license and the occupancy doesn't tell us until when you have you can operate from that specific address. So that's why it's important to provide at least an ID. It is important if the grant has restrictions of who can get the funds. So for example, a lot of the grants, they are considering like increased bonuses, or they include like extra funding according to like how many owners are DC residents. Might be that another grant like it specifically like requires and you need to be DC resident, or is to have one under a legal structure that is registered like an LLC, INC. But in the district, if you have a sole proprietor entity or an incorporated partnership with a trade name only, you will need to be a DC resident. There is no escape from that. Sole proprietors need to be DC resident. And so you need to have one, and you need to have one valid. Other licenses that, if you have beauty salon, you might need like, not only the beauty salon license, but maybe a professional license is required as well. So there are, in other instances with grants, they are not only open to businesses, but they are open to like independent like contractors, like for example, micro grant, and insurance. Insurance is important, that even though it's not a document requested, that if you are gonna enter and if you are gonna apply for a grant, if you think that you have high probabilities of getting that particular funding, you will be requested insurance documents. So just to show that you're in compliance with the laws and regulations from the district. That usually is not requested at the beginning, but you will see that information in a lot of applications. So what we request all these documents, we see a lot of different discrepancies, and a lot of pretty smart people trying to hide or trying to chop or trying to cut like the information they don't want us to see. So we request information, but as well, there are ways for us to review your documents even without them. So if you provide a document that is, it doesn't capture part of the business license, we will be able to, review what's going on with that and why you hide the information. So be clear and honest. If you don't have a current business license, prepare for asking. And then, so for example, there are some grants where you can provide like a copy of your receipt that you actually are in process of renewing that license, and that will be valid. There are other grants that request like a business license for a longer period of time. And that usually is for you to have, you know, an active business license if you get awarded. We can go to the next slide.
Viviana, I just want to make sure that we had a couple of questions earlier in the chat. I've been answering a lot of them, but there were a couple I want to make sure that we got.
Oh, yeah, we can. So we will go document by document.
Okay.
I can see the HOP, EOP.
Yeah, I can just list off the couple that I haven't answered. So somebody did ask under ID, you know, is that a personal ID or the business done in Bradstreet number?
No. So we're talking in general when you know, most of the grants we need to verify like who's the business owner and like where lives the business owner, or if it is a DC residence. For sole proprietors, they must be a DC resident, so we need to request like an ID with their home address. If they don't have, you usually will see on grants like you can provide a passport or passport, or you can provide, usually it's a picture ID. Then we follow up with a request of like proof that actually they have like residency in DC. What we usually do in some cases is that we give like a time frame where they can go and apply for their ID, and then with the receipt we can just move forward. In other cases, like for example for CPAF, the Commercial Property Acquisition Fund, there is like enough time for them to apply, get the ID, and then provide us a copy of it. It just depends of the requirements and the flexibility that we are allowed. But it usually is a picture ID, so we can verify the name and the address. Some cases we see like Maryland address, but they mention that they live in DC. So in those cases, sometimes we need to request additional information like, okay, I see that you changed since when you live in that location. Can you give us, you know, certain documents? And that depends on every grant.
Just two quick more, and I know we'll be able to do Q&A at the end. And I'm happy to help with this answer too. There was a question about certificates of occupancy and ghost kitchens. And so if someone is occupying someone else's space as sort of a sub requirement, I think that might be a very grant by grant determination depending on eligibility, but I wanted to raise that to you.
Yeah, it depends what they consider. So, for example, catering businesses like food trucks, like ghost kitchens, like they call. Also, another food trucks mobile food. That it is not really a food truck, so they do have another type of licenses. They do have another type of permits. But yeah, we can tap in that in the next couple of slides.
And then the last question is just the asterisks, the two that don't have asterisks. Is there something else on those two?
No, that's fine. I just you know, for example, like Ein Letter, you should have a copy of that. Business license needs to be on your business location, so you should be able to go and take a picture to the wall. Certificate of occupancy, that needs to be on your wall too, right? If an inspector comes to visit you, you should have those two. You know, how do you call that? Displayed, yeah, in the premises. So you will have at least your business license, your occupancy permit, and usually other licenses. If, for example, if you are like beauty salon, you need to have your beauty license, and also like any other. So there are some that actually they need to be displayed. So for those, you should be able to take a picture of them.
I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. If we didn't get to your question now, we will have time for questions at the end, and I'll continue to address them in the chat.
So, so common mistakes that I usually see. So when I'm reviewing your legal name and you have there an Ein Confirmation letter sample, that's usually the letter we are looking for. Not some cases they can be flexible and you can provide like your OTR, like taxes, like your quarterly taxes, and you highlight the information. But some grants, you really need to provide your Ein letter. And in the Ein letter, we want to see that the legal name matches, and then you have like actually assigned an EIN number. And then what we use is that we use that name under your EIN or the name on your application, and we run it through like public records that in this case is like Corp Online. We will send those links later. And then you will type your information. So for example, there I type City First Enterprises, and you will see that the company name is there. If it has a trade name, it shows like when you click in the name, but it tells me what type of status you have. Do you have an active status? You have a revoked status? Do you have, there are several ones. I don't remember all, but that's most of the cases what we look. If it is dissolved already, and then organization type, are you a nonprofit or a for-profit? So there are grants that are only open for for-profit businesses. So if you provide your application and we see that you're registered under a nonprofit structure, then you will be, ineligible in this case. But also see your jurisdiction. So for example, for the Resiliency Grant last year, I think it was 2001, we only provided funds to domestic entities. And that means entities that the main legal address and the main source of income, it is DC. So there is something called foreigner entities, and that means a business that it was incorporated outside the district and then bring business to the district. So they use their name or a similar name in some cases to register that company. That means that that company makes or provides services not only in the place when it was originated, but also in DC. And we have a lot of mixes like Delaware, DC, Maryland, DC, Virginia, DC, and other states, right? And there are some grants that has restrictions. So for example, if bridge fund, it does not have restrictions, but when you see domestic, go ahead and review, because a lot of business owners actually are not, yes, they are not aware what is the structure. And then they feel, oh yeah, you're registered in Delaware, but I don't do anything in Delaware. So they find that maybe if I domesticate my entity, I will be eligible for different grants. But that's a decision that it should not take only in consideration access to grants, but it needs to be talked with your lawyer and with the other business owners. Just make sure that that change, it will make sense for your business. So if you don't know if you are a domestic or a foreign entity and you are working in like one or more states, you might want to check that. The other thing is that the EIN letter can have a lot of issues in terms of most of the people do it by themselves through the website, or they filed with help of another company with an RA, a resident agent. Maybe they use the services of like, technical assistance services. And sometimes like you add another letter, you didn't add the correct name. There are some discrepancies. So if you see discrepancies on how you are registered in Corp Online, how you're registered with the IRS. So what is first is how you're registered with the district. So if that's your name, you will need to contact the IRS to change that name. EIN letters, you can have a different address from a different state. You might register your business in another place. We usually don't really invest too much time in where it is your address. With the IRS, what you usually do in your tax returns is that you update like your current address. However, if you want to update your EIN letter, you are welcome to contact the IRS and follow the steps to kind of change the legal address to the one that you currently have. Now, in the EIN confirmation letter, you usually put like the principal owner or one owner under the EIN. So the name there, it doesn't always match the business owners that is applying for the grant. If you acquire the business, you usually have to do another EIN. So the name is the name and the address can be from a different can be different. But it's important is that the legal name needs to be the same. Most of the cases, and then an issue that you're gonna have is that you don't have the EIN confirmation letter, but they are, the IRS recommends to maybe talk with your bank, because when you open like a business account under your entity name, you provided an EIN letter maybe 10 years, 20 years back, and they can just make a copy for you, or you can contact. It usually takes like max of 7 business days, but what I hear from the IRS to their capacity right now, they can take 14 weeks. They can email that, but they prefer to fax it for some reason. If you provided EIN through an SS4, if you have an ITIN number and not a social security number, then you will need to contact them and they will do it by fax or email, just depends. But you cannot recover the EIN easily. It takes an additional step. Can we go to the next slide? So certificate of clean hands, this is where like 90% of the problems, I see a trade name instead of business name, business legal name. So for example, I see, let's call it, and I'm not advertising, but I'm drinking Pita Coco. So let's call it that the clean hands, it says that name. And then, but actually that's not the name of this entity. The name of this entity is Coco Inc., let's suppose. So what I want to see there is the legal name, not the trade name and not your name. If you're a sole proprietor, yes, you should have that clean hands under your name. But otherwise, that means that you don't provide the correct document. So the way that you should fix it is contact the OTR, and you can contact it via the My Tax on the website, My Tax DC, I think it is, and then upload, request a change and upload a copy of your articles of incorporation in your EIN letter. So the delay of most of the grants, and a lot of times when we don't provide a grant, is because you are missing your clean hands. So most of the cases is clean hands certificate. There are also, sometimes when it's a trade name, we give them a little bit more time, but if we need to move fast and we need to review like hundreds of applications where we don't have like available funds for everyone, then we will need to go ahead and reject that application and put it as a pending or as missing document. So I think that if you are gonna have troubles, they probably are gonna be on certificate of clean hands. So remember, business legal name, not trade name. Business legal name, including, and there are some examples. So for example, city first process, let's call it that is INC. So if you have city first process only, I assume that's a trade name. It is not a legal name, doesn't have an ending then. If it has LLC, but you actually are an INC, it is incorrect. So it only has like a trade name like CFE, that's incorrect. So there are a lot of different permutations that can be there, but just to make sure that your legal name matches your business, your EIN letter, your business license, your registration. Next one. Okay, so incorrect document. There is something online called Clean Hands Certificate by DCRA. And when we verify, when we find that document is incorrect, so you need to find the Clean Hands Certificate from OTR. That's the only Clean Hands Certificate that grants request. This one is an old document that is still online. They haven't taken out, and it caused a lot of confusion to people that never applied for a grant. So this one on the right side that you see on your screen, that's an incorrect document. Next one. Oh yeah, and I have a good standing. So good standing, usually at the beginning of the pandemic, they requested a good standing certificate. It does have a cost. It is $50. So, and a lot of times they waive that requirement because we actually can go and review if your business is still active. We consider that you're in good extent. The other thing is that you might have all these documents, but when we verified your information, we realized that you are under a revoked status, and that's really serious because even if the grants don't advertise that you must be in an active status with DCRA, what happened is like if you are under a revoked entity, your license, your entity cannot operate in the district. So remember, there are biannual reports that you need to submit to DCRA. And this is a problem that we have like at the beginning of the pandemic when everyone started to forget like, you know, the normal things that they did because we are in a pandemic, so that there are more important problems to resolve. And one of them that we put on the side, it was to submit those reports. So what happened? That you needed to submit, let's say in 2021 April, and then you didn't submit it by September, so then your entity gets revoked. So what you need to do for activate that entity is that you actually have to pay that missing report that is usually $300 plus a late fee that is $100 more. So that goes $400 plus a reinstatement that is another $300. So applying for a grant is not cheap then at that point. So make sure that you have an active status. If you are not sure or your accountant is not sure they provided that report, go ahead and review it. And the web page where you can do that is Corp Online. This is something really easy to fix, but it can take up to 7 days to get in an active status. In some case, we take a look that you pay your reports, and then you just need to send us a receipt of reinstatement when you request it, and we can move forward so we don't have to wait for those 7 days. But for disbursement of the funds, we actually need to verify that your entity is already on an active status, because technically we cannot provide funds to an entity that cannot operate in the district, even though they have a license, even though they have everything. It doesn't matter. It declares that your entity cannot operate in the district or and receive revenue. So let's go to the next one. Oh, yeah, some of the questions are really good. We can go over a couple of them later. So about business license and occupancy permit. So if you see there is like a green that is circled says certificate of occupancy. So it's COFO number. So there you can find if your business license is under a home occupancy, that is home occupancy permit, HOP, or an electronic home occupancy. What it means, the A means the E. I'm sorry, I speak Spanish, so I always confuse those two sounds. That means that you actually file for the business license online. So you got like an electronic home occupancy permit. So you just select, oh yeah, I meet all those requirements. So that tastes the same. HOP and HOP means the same, and you are operating from home. Okay, so if you are at e-commerce and you don't have a retail space, you are not renting like an office in an office building, you have that license. If you are operating from other place that is not your home, you are required to obtain a new license under the certificate of occupancy number. So for example, if I'm working on a WeWork, then I will go to the WeWork desk and I say, hey, I need to request home occupancy under this building, or can I have a copy of your certificate of occupancy so I can show that I'm working from here with my lease, and then I can add that number when I request my new business license to operate on this WeWork location. So just because you are not operating at home doesn't mean that you can still operating with the same license. It means that you actually need to open a new license if you are operating from an address that is not your home. The other thing is if you have workers, technically you should not be using a home occupancy permit or a EHOP when you have more than two employees outside your household. So that means if I have like employee number 1, employee number 2, and they don't live in my home, I'm required to starting to operate from like an office space. And I know this is something that it is not put out there so much, but it's something that you still need to consider in terms of, if you are providing a business license with an HOP, EHOP, like I might want to if I'm operating already on an office because I have so many employees, I might have to request another basic business license, or just tell the CRA that I'm updating the address of my business license so they can have that change and your business license actually reflects where you're operating. A business can have way more than a business license. They can have a general business license, a catering, let's say that it's a mix of a restaurant, food truck, and catering. They can have the restaurant license, the catering license, the food truck license, and any other license. So a business can have way more than one business license. The problem here with applying for grants is like we actually, when see a general business license and we ask things on the retail, we actually verify all the business license under your business address or on the business license under your legal name to actually see, oh, okay, they are telling me that it's like consulting, general consulting, that let's say that covers this grant, but then I see a construction company under that entity, and it's a license they didn't provide that is ineligible. So if you have way more than one license, when they just like provide a business license, what I will do if I were you is I provide like a PDF where I put the general business license and then another business license that I have. If they ask for general business license and not professional business license, do not use it as a substitute. That will be marked as a missing document, unless the grant really says that you can upload, or it requests that you attach a professional business license. Most of the applicants, they are under how do you call it, professional services. They are not really required, some of them, they are not required to obtain a general business license, so they might not have it. But in most of the grants that I have seen, professional, those are not eligible in most of the grants that I have seen that are like for corporate related. The other thing of the certificate of occupancy, and a lot of people get confused, is that is the certificate of occupancy needs to be under my name. It can be under my landlord, or it can be under the company that I'm like they have a lease that is not the owner. And the answer is like yes. As soon as like we can see that the zoning it is for the activity that you're providing, or as we can see that the address actually matches your business license in your lease, that's fine. If you want to, if you're operating like for example, a catering business, catering or like some food trucks, sometimes they don't have a CFO. What they can ask is request to the person that is renting the space to provide a copy, and with that they can submit, and that is not an issue in grants. The other thing is that some certificates, the new certificates of occupancy, have a deadline. The old ones no. So if you see you have any grant that needs to be like active until X day, don't panic. If it doesn't say that it has like a deadline, it doesn't have a deadline. You can submit that document. They are really old documents, and we can accept like certificates of occupancy that have like 20 years, right? But we usually recommend to get a new copy, because if you lose that one, that information usually is not in published records. So you might want to, update your information, or in case you lose the document. Now, the problem is that your business license needs to be renewed soon. and you don't have the login information because your account left, you don't have the notification with there's a code that you need to provide when you renew your license, you can call DCRA to request the information. But if you have login problems, it can take up to 7 days to fix them. So just make sure that your license is correct and that matches public records. If you want to verify the information public records, you need to go to a webpage that the name is Scout, and we'll provide that link later. Can I use my landlord certificate of occupancy for build-to consulting businesses? Yes, if it is requested. But your lease needs to match that address. Okay. The other thing is that a certificate of occupancy, sometimes it is provided only to one entry of the building. So if the building has it is in a corner with two different name streets, you might get a certificate of occupancy only with this entrance, and your lease is under this one. So you can write under the certificate of occupancy is the same building, it's just the streets that it's next to, and then we can go and Google it and verify that information. And sometimes your lease has the two doors and two streets, so you can highlight that. So when you provide a lease, please highlight that it's better for the reviewer to find the information, because leases can be really long. We cannot find information all the time. So highlight your business name, highlight the address, and highlight the amount that you need to pay on rent. If there is amendments, then you need to attach them as well. And really, we're running out of time. Can we take the next one quickly?
Yeah, I've been answering most of the questions in the chat, Viviana.
Yeah, great. Okay, so this is the most common mistakes, and I think we went over them. Are you in compliance with the CRA? Just make sure that you have an active status. If not, there are many resources. There's the small business centers, just call them. They are great. They can fix your problem. You haven't received a business license, call them. They can speed it up. And if the business name doesn't match, if the Ein Letter has a problem, you need to call the IRS. If you're a structure, you have new members and they are not updating the corp online in the DCR records, contact DCR and update that information. You need to have always an updated business license. If it is gonna expire in the next 30 days, you can renew at 30 days. So make sure you have a fresh one already or an application for a new one. Clean Hands certificate. Clean Hands certificate, just make sure that the name is the legal name, not a trade name, and not the legal name without, the structure, name of the structure. The certificate of occupancy, any commercial space needs to have a CFO. If you are living, you're working at home, you can provide, when you apply for the license online, it pops automatically a home occupancy permit or an electronic occupancy permit. If you're working from home, do not provide a CFO of your apartment building, okay? Because we have seen that, and if it's HOP, EFOP, we said this is not applicable. So if you're working from home, just the home occupancy permit or electronic occupancy permit that you get when you apply for your license, and your updated lease. Now, in most of the grants right now, we are not so strict in terms of the lease, but the lease needs to be under, if you have a legal structure, it is better that has the name of your legal structure, because if you are an owner of a different company and it's just a number, it can create some confusion. So if you first rented the place as an individual and then you are working there as an entity, you might want to update that with your landlord, so it's not so confusing. Next one. I think we are running out of time, but in terms of numbers that you need to submit, most common mistakes is taxes are password protected. There is only one page, 2 pages about taxes. No, we want to see all your taxes, all of them. income statement, profit and loss statement, the mistakes is that we ask for monthly and they give us not monthly, or they give and if you want to display your information about revenue, it is better provide like for example, columns January, February until December plus the total. If it is more than one page, that's fine. If it is monthly, great. Avoid to submit like 12 files, each one with, each month information. It is easier for us to verify information, like if we see all the data together. Now, if we're looking for liquor, percentage of liquors sales, food sales, divide that revenue in like the two categories that we are requesting, if applicable. The other thing is that if you are not pay yourself and you have payroll 0, you can add a note that we are not paying ourselves right now. So that can explain a lot of things what we see in your application. Grants, to mark well what income is for grants, because in some of them, when we review your information, we actually take out that grants funds. But if you include it, we don't know where it is, then we don't take it out if we don't have to take it in account. Expenses, we display what are your expenses, because sometimes we need to take a look to them to see if you actually meet the requirements. Suppose that there is an example where we find that it was like an entity that has a lot of like costs for music and entertainment, and actually didn't meet the restaurant bridge fund requirements, but it did meet the entertainment like bridge fund. So we actually have to say to the district and to the other partner that they needed to submit application with them and not with us. So making sure again to read and to ask. Also, another common mistake with the employee payroll roster is that you include social security numbers. For privacy, do never ever include socials or ITINs when you provide payroll summary or employee roster unless it's requested, and that probably wouldn't be never. Review their data, and if you have it is not common at all to see that you make, let's call it 2,000, 2,000, 2,000 in one trimester, and then 3,000, 2,000, 2,000. That only shows that you have like information quarterly, and you're divided between 3, the information to be able to provide monthly information. So we want to see how your company is behaving in terms of income. There are a lot of questions related to how I do the calculation, how I know that I'm 30%, how I know that I'm 20%, or I meet the requirement of like a decrease in revenue. We do that because the usual information you find online, it is a reduced way to let you know how we are going to calculate it. However, there are a lot of things that we need to control. Not every entity start on the same month. Not every entity has the same behavior or had to close in the same period. Sometimes the effects on the pandemic, we cannot say that it's in one trimester. Sometimes it moves a little bit longer. So there are a lot of ways that we need to run our databases to be able to have a more accurate interpretation of what the formula so it is complicated. So you can do your own calculations. However, we will have a standardized way to do it, and that's usually for all the grantees. We can just continue going to the slides very quickly, and we're really past our time. But I think it's that.
And Viviana, if I could pause for a second, you're giving so many great grant prep gems, and for everyone listening to this, I think it might be worth going over it again when the recording link is sent to you, because there's a lot of nuances that are coming through. Before Kate jumps in on the next 2 slides, and I'll wrap us up. I wanted to echo that all this content will be available by slides, and we'll email it to people. In case you have to leave, we are going a little bit over time due to a technical glitch we had at the beginning of the live training. So if you have to jump off, we're glad that you joined us, and look out for the email with the slides and a link to the recording. And if you had a question and didn't get a chance to ask, you're welcome to email it to us at Inno.ED@dc.gov. Back to regularly scheduled program.
And we are not going to go over too much on this, but another common application submission problems, and this is where it gets really tricky, is that do you hire a consultant? If you're going to hire a consultant, just make sure that it's going to do their job correctly. And we are not talking about like putting the application in place. It's like actually reading all the materials, adding the information there. Like if they know their business and they want to provide also your information. A lot of times we cannot provide the funds, not because they are not eligible, just because we don't have the email of the business owner. So who needs to sign a contract is the business owner. But if only we have the name of the consultant, the phone of the consultant, the email of the consultant, we cannot do anything. Like we can, during the pandemic, there was a lot of like movement in like businesses closed, like people got sick, we were not able to locate sometimes the consultant. So make sure that the consultant is going to provide your information and the consultant information so we actually can reach someone. And remember, the responsible party here is the business owner. So make sure that if you're going to hire someone, to put your information there and give you an update and brief you in what are your responsibilities and obligations under the agreement. And most important, when you have to sign something, read what you need to sign, because it is at the end your responsibility to provide all the receipts for every single expense. So do not put that on the consultant that's just going to do the application. You need to own that process. So you need to make sure that your consultant or the person that is writing the grant or the narrative knows what is your data, and you know the responsibilities of getting that grant. We get a lot of communication after the dispersal of funds because of that. And in some cases, we cannot disperse the funds if we don't have complete and accurate information. So the responsible party is the business owner. Business owner needs to own this process. So if there is too much narrative, you might need to hire someone, right? But most of the grant relief grants, you really don't need to hire someone because there is no really narrative. There is no way to put sometimes narrative. We only ask for documents. There are some people that attach letters, and yes, we read them. However, it might not be fair for the rest of the applicants not to have the same opportunity that you do. Well, like submitted whatever reasons that you want the grant. So we try not to review it, not to read it if you provide, just to give the same fair access to everyone. If the narrative is requested, do your best job. If it says 50 lines, use those 50 lines to make it clear. Be concise, be clear what it does your business, for how will help you. Just follow the questions and answer the questions. Clear and concise. The other thing is that you can request support letters. So for example, Grace Streets as a grant where you can request a lot of support letters from CDFIs that are gonna work with you in reviewing that you have all the documents necessary to apply. You might want to have your a local representative to give you a support letter. You might want to have a vendor, name it, people that work with you, that know what you do, what you're gonna do for the community, and how you're gonna help to achieve the main objective of this grant. So previously we mentioned, objective is the most important. What it needs for what, who is the target population, and for what is gonna do this money, for you and for the district. So focus on that and write in base of that. Extra paperwork, there is, for example, a lot problems with DUNS numbers, problems with your active, I think DUNS numbers after if you don't use it. It's like, don't use it, then you have to request or you have to activate your number again. So there's a lot of paperwork. So for example, in Great Streets, most of the applications that, you know, that they have, that the business owner have the energy, they have the narrative, they have the numbers, but maybe don't have the 2 quotes from a CVE like contractor to submit. And usually for Great Streets, that's the main obstacle. So not working prior to the that application opens, not working prior to that. So for Great Streets, go ahead and review the last year documents, the last year application. Do it as you're gonna submit that application, and you will have 90% of the application done. You already identify who's gonna be the contractor is gonna make your quotes. You already know how much you are gonna charge. You already are gonna have an appointment for that period of time. You're gonna have all the documents to be able to submit that. And remember, that's a really competitive grant. And in like other time that is not COVID-19, maybe that's the only grant that you will be able to apply if you are like a retail business in certain like areas. So right now it is like period that businesses haven't encountered in the past. You know, grants for like businesses for profit is something that we didn't imagine like 5 years ago. And unfortunately, it's because, you know, the pandemic, but, you know, there are a lot of things that business owners need to learn to be able to submit an application. And we have to learn fast how to do them.
Viviana, can I jump in with a quick comment on the top point on the slide? And I think you said I just want to say one piece from DSLBD. We know that people do sometimes hire consultants, and we always offer a warning with that. You know, we cannot make recommendations to grant writers. If you are choosing to work with someone in that, be very careful on your costs. A lot of grants are designed with the intent that you shouldn't have to hire, but we know that people sometimes do. But recognize that those costs usually cannot be reimbursed by the grant, and you might owe those costs. You will owe those costs whether or not you get the grant. So anything that you are putting money out towards speculatively towards that grant, you might not get back. And so please just be aware of that.
Yeah, and please be aware that also the eligible like categories of that particular grant, most of them, they will not cover consultant fees. And sometimes like not even like preparation for taxes. If taxes are allowed, sometimes only like the amount that you pay for the taxes, and that's it. And we need the receipt for that, but it will not pay any tax preparation or like filing. So just be aware that it might be not a way to recover, and it might be a way to not go back to certain expenses. So when and you sometimes we don't know when it's gonna be that period of like use of funds until we get the subgrantee agreement. That usually for those like recovery grants that we have seen over the last, well, you don't want to mention 2 years, what we have seen is like the actual subgrantee agreement come after or during the time that you're providing the grant funds, and we realize, oh, they can go back 1 or 2 months, or they cannot go back at all. So you just consider that those expenses, as you said, they might not be recovered at any point. The other thing is insurance. There are requirements that are pretty strict on their, what is this office of, do you remember the name of the political blanco there?
Which, just tell me what they do and I'll tell you the
for
office.
Insurance.
The Office of Risk Management.
Yeah, Office of Risk Management has a list of like the minimum requirements for like food industry. Sometimes they don't align too much with what like currently we have seen the business owners. Most of the cases like the grants request like 500 under like employment, you know, liability, but sometimes it's 500, 100, you will see. But general liability is something that you will have a minimum of 1 million. And 99% of the businesses, they have that. But an active like business license that, I'm sorry, an active insurance, and make sure to make, to understand the distinction between like a certificate of insurance that is only 1 page. They usually is a form called ACOR, and it has like a like a resume, like a summary of your policy. We in the district never request a policy. So if it has more than like 10 pages, that's not it. It's just one that says ACRE on the top. It has your legal name there, the place that you actually are insured. So if you're applying for the entity and for the location you have in 14th Street, we want to see 14th Street on that. And the certificate holder, it just asks, we request. So do you have the insurance and prepare? If your insurance doesn't have your legal name there, then adjust it. So when it comes the time, it is easier for you to provide and to have all the documents at that time. Read the subgrantee agreement as I mentioned it. And then if I had any problem, just you can sometimes for city first impressions, you can ask for a call. Hey, I have a lot of questions. Can I talk with someone 5 minutes? Provide your phone number and then we might call you. That we actually call. So the other thing is that we call sometimes even don't ask us because answering the question sometimes implies to asking something else. So if the information is not in the or is not so clear, just ask. You speak another language. If you speak Spanish, I probably can send you a better email in Spanish than in English. So just make sure to, say like, I speak Spanish in the case. We do, city first enterprises do not have staff that speak like other languages. So, well, I speak Hungarian too, but we don't provide those services in Hungarian or other language. But usually like city first enterprises is able to answer the emails in Spanish or in English. Because we have more than one staff that speaks Spanish. There are other entities. If you have a problem with language, at the beginning of the presentation, there is a list, there is support in other languages. So make sure like you feel comfortable in your language, like just to try to reach us that way. Yeah, I think that's almost, that's all.
I think that wraps up your slides. Thank you to everyone who has stuck with us. And I want to say a huge thank you to Bibiana, not only for today's presentation, but all of the great work that she and her colleagues at City First Enterprises are doing to help administer some very big and important grants for the district. We were very happy to be able to bring them here both for today's session and for the session that's coming up so that people can hear it more directly from the grant administrators. And I think talking about reaching out with a phone call is a great way to wrap that section up, because if you get an opportunity to engage directly with the grant administrator, it's a great way to ask questions, get clarifications. I highly recommend taking advantage of any opportunity to reach out, get things clarified as you're going through something. I'm just going to talk about a few bigger picture common challenges. Those were very sort of grant specific. This is, on a specific grant, but some of the really big places where we see people see challenges, and then I think Camille is going to wrap us up. One of the hardest pieces is that people often find out about a grant too late. And Camille is going to go through some different places where you can be keeping an eye, but one of the best ones for for-profit businesses right now is obviously dc.com. Has an information about district government grants that are coming out. But another piece, sometimes you find out about it too late, but sometimes you start it too late. For a lot of organizations who provide grants, we see a huge swell of applications started at the very end of the grant period. You have been seeing a number of different grant extensions, but do not count on the idea that a grant may be extended. Do not count on the idea that if the grant is due at 2 o'clock, that if you get in at 2:01, it might be fine. Most places, they have a hard deadline. That is the deadline, and you want to be in by that deadline. But also a lot of people just fail to read the instructions. We know that there are a lot of them, but that is the space that is going to get the information so that you can submit correctly. Because if you forget a piece or you don't look at it correctly, you also may not be considered for the grant. To the point I made earlier about consulting, and it's not just consulting, it's other pieces too. A lot of times people will pay people for things for a grant that they don't have to pay for. And I'm going to give you 2 other examples. Your EIN number that was referenced often, that's free. That is free from the IRS. That is the same as Dun & Bradstreet. There are a lot of people who would like to charge small business owners $300 to go and register a free number for you, and they do. So, if you aren't sure if something should cost you money, and almost everything that you are applying for a grant outside of your actual business license and corporation and insurance shouldn't cost money. But if you aren't sure, reach out to us, reach out to your grant administrator, reach out to the Small Business Resource Center and say, hey, should I have to pay for this? So that way and aren't expending costs you don't need to expend. Don't guess about the answer to a question. Reach out to people and ask it. Don't hope that the grant maker is going to overlook missing documentation. Usually they legally are not allowed to. A lot of people are like, I'm really close, I'm great, so maybe they will award anyway, and usually they cannot. So, they have to follow the legal rules that they've set out. And this looks like it is missing a little bit on the end of the slide, but if you are expecting a grant, if you're expecting that you're going to get a grant, or you're expecting a grant of a certain amount, temper the expectations because a lot of people apply to grants. And so there are limited funds. Different grants operate differently. Some it's competitive and only some people will be awarded. Even in lotteries, there's only enough funds to go around to some businesses. And even on those that are looking at revenue loss and other pieces, the larger number of people who apply, if they're all eligible, then the less that everyone will get. So have those expectations in mind, and don't count on having the grant in your budget until you have that grant in your budget. Please don't spend money. Please don't spend money until it is in your account. So I'm going to turn things over to Camille.
Thanks, Kate. And those are some really great high-level things. It's things that we see happen time and time again. And like Kate said, we're grant makers. We have to follow the rules, which means we can't bend them for late submissions or incomplete submissions. A couple of quick highlights on where to get help. Bibiana and Kate covered a lot of these. I just wanted to call attention to a couple that weren't mentioned yet. Often you cannot call for assistance. Most grant makers have you email something. So be sure when you email, you leave some time so that they can respond. So if the deadline is today at 2 o'clock, your email should have gone out like the end of last week, just to make sure they have the time to respond to you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Yes, if you want a call, request a call via email.
Yes. Oh, great. Okay. And then another thing to point out, it was mentioned earlier to attend the information sessions or watch the recordings if you miss it. If you go into the information sessions, I recommend having read those grant agreement documents, the grant application documents that Kate and Viviana mentioned earlier, the RFA, the frequently asked questions. Review those early and come to that grant information session with your questions and drop them in the chat at the beginning, just to make sure they get covered, and be the first to raise your hand if you can, if it's a live Q&A session. That might be your only opportunity to get a live response as opposed to an email response. Taking advantage of the pre-submission eligibility checks, that means that some grantors will say the grant is due on the 31st of the month, but if you submit something by the 15th, they'll check to see if you meet the eligibility requirements. Not all grant makers do this. DSLBD, our Inno.ED team, often will do this. But if they do it, take advantage of that. It does mean you have to hustle a little bit sooner to have your documents submitted for review, but it's completely worth it. As you saw when Vivian was walking through how many things have to line up, the name has to line up, the address has to line up. It may just be a small thing, an oversight that you have on your preparation. But if you go through that pre-submission eligibility check, that might help catch that and give you some time to fix it before the actual application is due. In the slide version that we'll send to you by email, the links to both the DC Main Street, the community-based organizations, as well as the DCRA Small Business Resource Center that we mentioned a couple times, that will be on this slide. And finally, contact anyone you need outside of your business to complete the application. Contact them early. Your accountant who might be pulling your financial documents. If you're doing a project that requires estimates from vendors, contact them early. It's likely to. If it's a citywide grant, a lot of other grantees, grant applicants will be contacting those same vendors. So you want to get on the phone with them sooner than later to get the paperwork from them so they don't slow down your application. Next slide, please. This was mentioned earlier by Viviana, but just to underscore, if you're applying for a DC government grant, often the information is provided, the key elements of the grant is provided in alternate languages. But if you don't see it or if you attend an information session, be sure to contact the DC government grantor's office by email or call the main agency's number, because you're entitled to receive this information in your preferred language. Even if you feel very comfortable with English, it might be worth just having the information interpreted or translated for you, because some of the nuances of the grant terms may not translate that well into other languages. So it's your right to have this information in your preferred language. And this is a link to the DC Language Access Act that talks about that. If you're not applying for a DC government grant, it might be a private grant or maybe a federal grant, That Language Access Act only applies to DC government grants, although most grantors do try to make the information available in multiple languages. If not, you could possibly contact your Main Street if you're a DC Main Street or a community-based organization like City First Enterprises or other ones. And also our mayor's community offices may be able to help you. And I'll have those links in the slides when we email them. Next slide. Where to find grants. We're trying to make it easier for you as the months go on. Kate mentioned a great website to go to, obviously DC, that has all the DC government grants related to businesses are posted there. The DC Business Toolkit, which centralizes a lot of information, grants, classes, other information for you in one place. If you use this link, Find Funding DC Business Toolkit, that will give you a list of all the grants and other financing opportunities that are out there, private and public. DC Women's Business Center has an awesome list. If you're a women-owned business, check out their list. And then we have a roadmap on the toolkit. The funding alert, which is highlighted here, will kind of pull that all together for you. It comes out a couple of times a month. Sometimes it's a summary of what's coming up, and sometimes it's a feature about a particular grant that just opened. But be sure to subscribe to that to kind of have it pulled together and put into your email box in real time. So that is the last slide. I know we went long, and I appreciate those who hung on with us for the whole time. Again, this information will be emailed out. This is how to reach Viviana, Kate, and I in the future. If you have any questions about what we shared today, or you have another topic related to grants you'd like us to cover. Next slide, please. Oh, and then the next slide with upcoming training. Just to let you know that the second part of this training, navigating the bridge grant fund specifically, which is what City First has partnered with the Deputy Mayor's Office to administer that grant. That will be next Monday, 7 o'clock, on the 7th at 2 p.m. And since you registered for this event, you'll receive a link to how to register for that event. Next slide. The next couple of slides are information about some DSLBD pitch programs that are coming up that do have a financial component for those who complete the program, our Dream Pitch program, as well as our We Aspire Pitch program. And those are launching this week, and we have a session on Wednesday at 12 o'clock. Check out our Eventbrite for that. If you can't attend but want to get updates about that, you can sign up for the Dream Pitch registration list on Eventbrite, as well as the We Aspire registration list on Eventbrite. And now let's jump into questions and answers. I think Kate answered a lot of them via the chat. I'm not sure if there are any others in the chat, Kate, that are outstanding for answers.
Not that I'm directly aware of, but I know there was a lot of activity in the chat. And so one question that did just come in is if the Dream Pitch, if you can still sign up, and we haven't quite opened it. We believe that's happening tomorrow. We will be emailing everyone as soon as that opens, but it hasn't opened yet for this year. The Dream Pitch is for Ward 7 and 8 micro businesses. Aspire is for returning citizen businesses. But have we missed questions in the chat? If folks want to either raise their hand or drop it in the chat again, if we missed your question and you haven't had it answered yet. And then I also know that we have some folks who are on the phone. So I may send some requests to unmute to our phone users in case you wanted to ask a question.
We are good.
Oh. That was just me in the chat answering something.
Okay. So before everyone leaves, just want to mention something. It's like you better provide a complete application, an application with a missed document, and then try to submit a document. They usually cause a lot of problems. Sometimes we cannot record the missing documents. So if there is not a first come, first serve language in the application, you can submit at the end and have the same probability to be selected. So just keeping that in mind. If you submit an incorrect application or incorrect information request prior to submit another information, sometimes there is a way that the grant managers can and not use duplicated information. There is a clean data. We have to clean the data from our side. So if you have those issues, reach out to us with at least 1 business day, 2 business days prior to the grant close, just to make sure that you have the same probabilities of someone. Like, for example, if you don't submitted your clean hands, you might, when we review your documents, we might have to select missing documents. And if we don't have enough grants, we might prioritize those ones that have complete information. And we don't always request like every single document for every single one. We actually are not required to request like missing documents. So be aware of that. Better to present a complete application prior to the end of the period than an incomplete application. You will have way more probabilities of obtaining the grant that way.
A question.
Mm-hmm.
Did I hear correctly for the pitch that you were, if you are interested in a pitch, I understand it didn't come out yet, but it probably, you're hoping tomorrow. But if we don't have a physical location, well, actually, I have a two-pronged question. One, I am actually in a house, I'm working, but it's not, I don't own the house. So my parents, this is my childhood home. So how do I go about that as far as filling out the paperwork? And my second question is in regards to the pitch. Did you say that the pitch is only for those who have a brick and mortar in 7th and 8th, the 7th and 8th ward, or for people who are interested in getting into the 7th and 8th ward?
So I will take those in reverse order. So the Dream Pitch this year, which should be opening tomorrow, is an adaptation of our traditional Ward 70 Dream Grants. And that is funding and support that is specifically for Ward 78 resident-owned micro businesses. And so there's residency of the owners required for that fund. There will be an information session that will share more, and then a lot of different information sessions for people to get attached. The Dream and Aspire pitch is a funding opportunity. It's not a grant in the same way, which we'll talk about in the upcoming information sessions. There is funding that comes along with it for those who are accepted, but it's going to give people an opportunity to get licensed. It looks a little bit different as we are working to remove barriers to access. Since I didn't mention it as clearly, Aspire, which wasn't part of your question, that is specifically for returning citizen entrepreneurs. Now, coming back to the question of how to set up your business, if your business is home-based, but you are not the one who, if it's someone else's home, like if you do not have a lease or a grant agreement, that is going to be a question of whether or not you can secure a home occupancy permit, which becomes a question of talking to the DCRA zoning administration. So I'm going to suggest that you go through the Small Business Resource Center at DCRA because there can be a lot of different paths and setups. And so we can tell you kind of in general how it works, but DCRA, since they're the ones who make all the final decisions, are always the best people to give you a final answer. But if you are having troubles getting a hold of the Small Business Resource Center, you can always reach out to us and we can both get you connected and answer things in the general, but you're going to want to get those really specific pieces answered from them so that we don't misspeak.
Thank you so much for that.
Any other questions? I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.
Yes. My name is Nabi Hadis. Currently, we are trying to open a new cafe. It's a new businesses, and we have all the necessary business licenses and occupancy permit, all the things we already have. The challenge what we have right now is, we are doing our hiring process and with the supply chain problems, we exhausted all our funds budgeted for this operating the business. Everything is finished, the build out is already done, and then everything is ready to go. Yeah. But the cash flow and everything is not there. So this fund, this because we can.
Blake, put on your mask, buddy.
So one thing I'm gonna
take you up.
We have somebody else who is off mute, so I'll see if I can make sure that they're muted. So if you are looking at funding questions overall, and Camille, I don't know if you want to jump in on this piece of the conversation. It may be a grant that's what you're looking for, but it may be other funding opportunities as well. And so DSLBD provides one-on-one technical assistance to help sort of center where your technical assistance requests are, any help we can provide, and then attaching you to additional free technical assistance across the district. Camille, do you want to speak to that any additionally?
Oh, sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, through our district capitalized program, we can connect you to other funding options, which might include loans, lines of credit, rebates, generating revenue, as well as financial management resources to help you. So to tap into those, the link for the district capitalized programs at the beginning of the slides that you'll receive. You could also, as Kate mentioned, sign up to meet with us. If you go to our Inno.ED booking link, which was provided earlier in the slides, and I'll include on the email that I send out. You can book time with me by phone or with any Inno.ED team member. And then starting on Wednesday, this Wednesday, we'll have drop-in hours for group office hours at 3 o'clock every Wednesday for February and March. So that's a great place to just drop in and ask questions like that.
And I will share that cash flow crunches are really common for a lot of small businesses. And many people are hoping that like a grant is going to fill that space. And overall, in your overall revenue and how much money you're making a year, a grant might be able to do that. The challenge that we see on grants is that sometimes it can still take time to get to that money. And so it can be hard to plan for when it comes in. And so it's a good, if you are seeing a cash flow, something coming up on your horizon, wherever you are in your business, whatever your business is, in the next little bit of time, you want to start working on that topic long before a grant payment might come in. And so whether you're working with us, whether you're working with a CDFI, whether you're working with a strategic accountant, being able to do everything to plan ahead for that. And it sounds like the person who called in is, but for everyone else who's listening, highly recommend not just waiting to see if you get the grant, but exhausting many other options as well. Because we know that that's a very sensitive time for businesses to be able to stay open.
And also adding on that question, just make sure that the grants actually is not requesting that you generate revenue, but one day. So for example, today I answered 2 questions related to the bridge fund with new businesses that they are going to start operating this year. However, they did not generate revenue during last year or the period where we're looking for that 30% of the decrease. So if it doesn't meet that criteria, it will be considered ineligible. So make sure that the grant actually says if it has any restriction and when you needed to generate revenue to see if you're eligible or not, because not all the grants provide access to businesses that they are starting or they haven't generated any revenue at all.
All right, thank you.
That's a great point. Yeah, thanks for the question. And we'll pause there for questions, but if you had a question that we didn't get to in the chat or by unmuting, please email us at inno.ed@dc.gov. And here's also Viviana's email if you want to connect with her, Viviana at cfenterprises.org. Again, we'll be emailing the slides and a link to the recording, as well as a link to the next session on the 7th, which will focus on navigating the Bridge Fund grant requirements. We'll be emailing that all this week so you can register for that. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. I apologize for those who came live for the technical glitch at the beginning of the session. We cover a lot of great grant prep gems. I hope it was helpful, and you have a great afternoon. Take care.